They're not my teacher.
So it is formula.
But
8 hours.
you're going to give it to me in perfect form.
But I wanted to see how you thought of this one.
I won't do that.
So it's 4 milligrams times. See, I get that. See, that's where I'm messing up. I have to look at that.
But different teachers so I want your opinion.
Get it in the end.
Calculations.
There's one
Again, what do we have here? Chalkwise with notes.
digestion or urinary.
Yeah, that one.
That's the rehydration. Which is 4 milliliters per kilogram times it's 2 milligrams. But it's the first and second time and after that.
The first 8 hours. Right.
I understand the 8 is kind of tighter than the 8. But it's calculation. 4 milligrams times 3 milligrams.
There's one of the slides.
Okay.
Oh, no, I never done it.
Let's get this show on the road. The sooner we get done, the sooner we're out of here.
You want to send us in the parade?
Don't do that. Yeah. Anyway, last lecture. This is it. The party is over.
Aww.
If you haven't done evaluations, of course, evaluation, make sure you do those, please. Get that out of the way. But let's just roll with show and tell as we usually do. Mumps cases. More mumps cases in Ohio than in the entire United States last year. And it tends to be focused around where?
College campuses.
Is it OU?
Yeah, the Ohio University.
Tau.
So that's still going on. It's slowed down since a week ago, but still there are other cases just kind of showing up sporadically. So and so and so and so. What I have not heard word on, maybe somebody you can. Oh, let me get that for you. Is whether these people were immunized or not. So I don't know what the scoop is on that one. So, but we'll find out with time. Yes, dear.
I never got a chance to watch it yet, but it's on my list of things to watch. But there was like, I guess, it's on the internet, there's a Penn and Teller did like a debunking of you should give your kids vaccines. And I kind of got to see the beginning of it. And I guess they have like an online series where like they do.
It's called bullshit.
Yeah. Yeah, I was trying to figure out how to explain it, but yeah. Yeah, no, but yeah, and I forgot what it's called, but but yeah, so I just thought that was cool. I haven't got a chance to watch it yet, but I assume that it's probably been fully, it's like a 25-minute little episode.
This is a regular series?
Yeah, but this particular one was on, I watched the first 5 minutes and it was like, some people have heard that giving your kids vaccines may cause autism, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, that's bullshit. And then they go on and do this. They have all these diagrams, all the cool stuff that they do. So there might be something else.
And what channel?
I just found it online.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's actually on YouTube or Showtime, but you can find it on, or I'm sorry, HBO or Showtime, but you can find them all on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
It's right.
there you go.
Let's just play that for last one.
Yeah, it's a whole series that they're doing, but this particular one had to do with
Just
vaccines.
dealt with vaccines?
Yeah.
I'll take a peek at that then.
Yeah,
We can do that. What you got?
We were talking last week about my sister's hospital, and we talked about my sister runs a hospital in Qatar, and they found as she said, a fungus in their system, and they had to move a bunch of patients, and we talked about it, but it was somewhat common, but because it was in an ICU.
Aspergillus,
Aspergillus in the ICU. Put your head under.
It was like when we were talking about the fungi before, I think I made mention of this very common strain of a fungus that is commonly found on head dander, head hair. Remember the nurse brought in and killed off a bunch of kids in the NICU. Okay, yes?
I heard that there's a virus going around killing off a lot of pigs, making pork prices go up.
Yeah, there is a swine flu that's out there as well. I caught wind of that last week, but I haven't had a chance to look on the MMR. There was something that was listed there, I just haven't read the article yet, but that's going on. And then on top of that is the MERS thing. Everybody, it's a Middle Eastern respiratory syncytial virus, they call it MERS, which is, now they found a reservoir for that are camels. But it's a deadly respiratory virus, and that's spreading significantly through the Middle East right now. There were several hundred cases in Mecca, I know, and because then you have masses of people that are constantly going on pilgrimages, or jihad, to get where they want to go, and it's being spread really rapidly. So if you've got a camel at home, you may want to be careful. But what I would like for you to do, this course is over, is to still kind of keep in touch in terms of what's going on in the world of microbiology. There's a lot of stuff going on out there. And hopefully, if there's one thing that you gained out of the course, is that you can now read some of those and listen to some of that stuff and make some understanding out of it and say, I kind of know what they're talking about here and where the serious matter is of this, that, or whatever. Okay. We just have a couple of things to deal with today. Going back to this, we need to finish this up. And on your flow chart, under bacilli or rods, we did the gram-negative ones. And now let's just do a couple of the gram-positive ones. We're going to pick a few of these. We're not doing all of these by any means. But if you look at gram-positive, the next differentiating characteristic is whether they form spores or not. And if we come down and take a look at spore formers, down at the bottom, we see two genera. One is Bacillus, the other is Clostridium. Just a quick comment about Bacillus. From a historical point of view, remember that was important because it was Koch and Pasteur who isolated Bacillus anthracus as the first organism, a bacterium that was actually isolated into xenic culture. So we've got this Bacillus anthracus, or anthracis, as some people pronounce it. Real quickly, it forms spores. Our concern, remember, if you can go back to the very first lecture probably on this stuff, what was the concern about this organism today? Used as a
Powder is
the spores, yeah, as a biological weapon.
Yeah.
And there were concerns about that. It produces a very potent toxin, extremely potent toxin, and that's what kills you out of all of this. But on the other hand, we use that same toxin for Botox. So how does that work?
paralyzes the muscles in your face.
Okay, but it causes not, it doesn't cause contracture, it causes relaxation. So what does Botox do? It doesn't tighten the skin at all. It relaxes those subdermal muscles and the skin falls. So it's not one that causes, tightens everything up because it contracts the muscle. It does just the opposite. It causes flaccid paralysis. But it's got to be used in such a small concentration that if you were to use higher, you kill your patients, which one doctor did in Los Angeles a couple of years ago, decided to grow his own, and he used a concentration that was too high, and he permanently damaged a bunch of his women patients and killed one. Yeah.
How does Botox work with perspiration? I know a lot of people.
It's the same scenario. What it does is causes relaxation of those muscles, so the muscles don't tighten around the glands, and cause secretion. So it just it functions as a smooth muscle relaxant. And you know, some people get injected in their armpits, some people on their hands if they tend to be overly sweaty, and it works relatively well. You know, the one thing we don't know about Botox is we've only been doing this for what, 20 years? Maybe 25 years injecting people with this stuff. We don't know what the long-term effects of this are. You know, you keep, how often do people go back?
It's every 90 days.
So how much toxin is your liver going to withstand? Because it doesn't stay in the skin, it goes total body. So the question is, you know, what happens if a person gets Botox over and over? You end up, you know, being Joan Rivers, and I don't think you want to go that route.
I sure don't.
No, I don't either. Anyway, so there are loads of bacillus species that cause problems. A lot of food stuff again, food poisoning. There are some species of bacillus that are just so common in refried rice. They don't get killed in the first steaming because they produce spores, and then rice gets refried, and the organism exfoliates, and then you take it home, you eat only half of it, and then 4 or 5 days later, you eat the rest of the carton, and you end up with a green apple quick step again. And it's a self-limiting disease, but it's food poisoning, but pretty common with refried rice. Clostridium, big genus, and let's just talk about a few of them in that genus. The one, of course, that you're most familiar with is difficile. And in which most people call C. diff because it can't pronounce difficile. It can't pronounce, they have no clue what the C stands for. So Clostridium difficile, a lot of people pronounce it difficile. I've heard that one as well. But what's the scoop of this? Everybody in this room has got this bacteria in their colon. All of you do. But why don't you have massive diarrhea right now? Just blowing it right down your pants leg.
It's all opportunistic.
Yeah, and what else is going on in your colon?
Normal flora.
Yeah, there's this competition with all the rest of the flora that's in there, and therefore, you know, it's not a major problem, even though it produces these toxins that cause this destruction of the colon and produce what's something that's referred to as a pseudo membrane, because the mucous membrane of the colon actually gets destroyed and sloughs off. The bacteria get underneath that, where it's aerobic, and they love being in an aerobic situation. They start to produce their toxins, which causes more of that to slough off. So when you got a patient who's got this, you know, what are the problems? It's explosive diarrhea, right, and runny. You can smell it right away. You know what it is. It's got that distinctive odor to it, and at the same time, they may have lots of gas. And the worst scenario is that what? They're blowing this gas off, and they're blowing out the spores, right? So, I mean, phletus is worse than a cough in many cases because of the bugs that are found in your colon, yeah.
So you said these are naturally in our colon?
Yeah.
So what makes people, like, what does make people have, like, C. diff and stuff like those?
Okay, it's often referred to as antibiotic-associated colitis.
Okay, so it's just because it's cut off the normal flora?
Exactly. So what's happened, for one reason or another, the normal flora is disrupted, typically by antibiotics. And the bugs that are most susceptible get killed off. This guy, because it produces spores and because it can hide so well in bloody tissue, is the one that becomes the dominant bacteria that causes those problems. The spores from this bug, we have a problem in this hospital with those spores because they're all over the place. So the cleanup of that diarrhea is, you've got to be careful in terms of how you do that. They still use these. What do you do with the diarrhea you receive? Let's say you got somebody on a bedpan who's got C. diff.
Wipe them up, toss the rag in the bag.
Okay, but so you got the bedpan there, and what do you do with the bedpan?
Oh, you spray it out.
What do you do first, though?
You rinse it out.
Okay, and you use one of those high pressure things, And as soon as the water hits that, it just goes, spores go everywhere. So the bathrooms oftentimes are grossly contaminated with the spores because of the way we get rid of the fecal material. So think about that. We probably should take many more precautions than we do with that particular bug. So antibiotic-associated colitis, that makes sense, right? Because typically it's brought on by the indiscriminate use of antibiotics. Let's talk about just two other ones real quick here. What did I just say, botulism? That's Clostridium, that was not bacillus. I'm ahead of myself here. Botulinum, I'm sorry, was the one we were just talking about, Clostridium botulinum. It's not Bacillus anthracus that forms botulism. But what about this one? Tetani. And then we go back to our DTaP or Tdap. You can use either one. What's the scoop here? With Clostridium botulinum, we have flaccid paralysis. What's the scoop with Clostridium tetani?
Rigid?
Yes, or what's another name for that kind of paralysis? As opposed to flaccid, it's contractile paralysis. So you've all been injected numerous times with what?
Killed cells?
Okay, no.
Live,
No.
acellular.
Acellular. Here's the T, and the T in this case is a toxoid. It's an attenuated toxin. An attenuated toxin, which means an altered toxin, usually done using either formaldehyde or heat or both, and it still produces a strong antigenic effect and allows us to produce the antibody for that. But it doesn't last long. So right now, typically you get a new tetanus shot about every what? Yeah, something like that. What happens if, well, the question is, this particular organism, Clostridium tetani, is found in the soil everywhere. And it's so common, in the same way that Clostridium botulinum is pretty common in the soil. Anthrax is common in the soil out of all of these. So why don't we die from this stuff more often? Well, because we've been vaccinated. But let's make the assumption that you haven't been vaccinated, and let's build a scenario here. Because parking is so bad around here, you end up parking down on Howell. And you're here late at night, evening course, and you don't get out until 9 o'clock. And you got this Monday night course, and every Monday night you're walking down to your car, which is parked down there. And there's this person who is observing you, knowing your routine, and it's relatively dark by the time you're making your way back to your car. And this person now is waiting for you because he or she thinks that you have large sums of money and credit cards. So this person has bought a brand new knife. And this person is hiding behind the bush waiting for you to show up. A little bit nervous, drops the knife, picks it up again, but it's still shiny new. And as you come walking by, the person slips up behind you and jabs the knife up under your ribs. Like that, and pulls it back out again. Takes your purse or your wallet and runs. Maybe takes your cell phone too. What happens? These organisms tend to be anaerobic. So here's your morph, your belly button sticking out the back. You got your rib cage coming down here, and you got your heart right here. We're looking at it from a lateral view. The knife went in, came back out again, and you might think you even got punched as opposed to stuck. So if you make your way on home, by the time you get home, you take off your t-shirt and you notice that you're bloody. So you realize something has happened out of all this. But you go, boy, I don't think it's bad though. Maybe it's just where the guy nicked me. But what happened was the knife went in, the knife came back out, and it created all this necrotic tissue. In the same time, when the knife went in, all the spores that the knife, brand new, shiny knife, doesn't have to be rusty, picked up the spores from the soil, inserted those inside you. Very quickly, this becomes anaerobic, a lot of dead tissue. necrotic tissue, dead tissue. Circulatory patterns drop significantly because of the damage to the vascular system, and so the O2 concentration drops. These spores exfoliate, and lo and behold, then in 2 to 3 days, because you haven't gone to the hospital yet because you don't have health insurance, but you could have purchased it, but you missed the deadline. So you kind of notice a stiffness in the jaw and an aching in the back, and it becomes more difficult to move, and you start to kind of bend in funny ways, and you get to the hospital, and they go, my God, you've got tetanus. We're going to try to save you. What are they going to give you? So now you've got the organism in you, which is producing all of these toxins, which is slowly causing you to go into, your masseter and your temporalis tend to go, back muscles tend to go. That's why I call it lockjaw, because it produces this contractile type of paralysis. And in some cases, you clench your jaw so tightly you actually crack the mandible out of all this. What are they going to give you to try and save your life?
The toxin.
No, they'll give you the toxoid too, but toxoid is going to do what? Instigate an antibody response. We can't wait for that.
Immunoglobulin?
Exactly. So what they're going to do is send a message down to some horse farm in Lexington that has been injecting those horses down there that are too slow to run with the toxin, and they produce the antibody, the gamma globulin. Gather the gamma globulin, they bring it up here, they inject you with that to try to reduce the toxin content and hopefully to save your life. How many people in the United States die from tetanus toxin every year? I mean, it's minuscule, because so many of us have been vaccinated for it. It's a very effective vaccine out of it, but it's a toxoid out of that. So what have we dealt with so far with this DTaP?
Can I ask a question first?
Yeah.
Why does it get associated with rust?
It was a rusty nail syndrome. Somehow it had to be dirty.
Yeah, what?
Well, the spores, when they're on things, are microscopic. It has nothing to be, it's because you picked it up from the soil, and that nail happened to be sticking through a 2x4 that you didn't see when you were walking your dog with your flip-flops on, and it just kind of drove that nail right up through your foot.
It's an open wound plus dirt.
Yes, exactly right. We can draw another scenario too. We could do, but let's not do another one. We could do the car accident one, but I like this one better. But anyway, we saved your life, but it was close. It was close. And the lesson learned is that you need your tetanus shot every 10 years, just as a reminder to your immune system that this bug shows up with great frequency, and we've got to be prepared for it when it does show up. Non-spore formers. Some of these you know already. Acid fast. What was the genus we dealt with in lab? So gram-positive, non-spore forming rods just like that cough. Mycobacterium, and we dealt with smegmatis in lab, remember? But what are the two, and that's an opportunistic pathogen. It's the uncircumcised male syndrome. But what about these? Tuberculosis and lepra. Two very different diseases caused by two very similar organisms. Mycobacterium tuberculosis. What do you know about that? In your text, if you don't have it with you, on page 559, it's got this, Bauman's got this great little scenario in terms of what actually happens with tuberculosis. We usually think of it as what? Lung disease, correct? How does one get it? Somebody
Coughs on you.
Somebody coughing, sneezing on you, whatever it happens to be. What are the symptoms of a patient with tuberculosis?
Night sweats.
Yeah.
I didn't hear you.
Night sweats. They always ask about night sweats.
And what else?
Coughing.
Coughing,
Blood.
loss of weight, blood in the sputum, so and so and so. And typically the patient also has AIDS. Close correlation between AIDS, victims, or if we want to call them that, are people who have HI, the HI virus, and tuberculosis. These kind of run neck and neck. It doesn't always happen that way, but it does, because we've got a unique situation with this organism in that the infectious dose, what do we mean by that term? How many cells you need to cause the disease. The infectious dose for Mycobacterium tuberculosis we know is very small. We think it's very small. And there are some that have said maybe just, as few as 12 to 15 cells is all you need to come down with the disease. So you're on the elevator, somebody slips in behind you and coughs, one of those, and you get a snootful, and the bugs go down into the lungs, and what happens is they lodge themselves in, just looking right at it's just a great little diagram, again, 559, along the alveolar walls, where you got these simple squamous epithelial cells. And what will happen is it'll cling to those cells and in turn reproduce at that point. And what your body tries to do then is to say, I need to deal with these organisms that are reproducing here. And it'll send out, remember alveolar type 2 cells? Are you familiar with those terms, 1 and 2? What about, we've got macrophages that are constantly crawling through your alveoli, picking up dust and all this kind of crap. They kind of send the message that we've got these bacteria here that shouldn't be here. And what your body does then, it starts to envelop that colony with its own cells. So now we end up with this kind of small ball of our cells, which are enclosing the tubercular cells. And with some individuals, they'll go through the rest of their life with housed tubercular bacterium still very much alive in there, but not spreading throughout the body. But from time to time, what happens, usually due to stress on the system, other infections, i.e. HIV, those kinds of things, is that the organisms then start to reproduce and they break out of that almost calcified type of a cluster of cells. And they start to spread and cause an increased infection. The test we all get every year, we all get tested for that. You test positive, and then so we look at a chest x-ray, we don't see anything in there in terms of these nodules, these tubercles, as it were. We don't see anything like that. But it doesn't mean they aren't there, it's just that they're microscopic, very small, and your body has kept them in check. But what happens when things fall apart? The organism begins to spread rapidly, causes irreversible lung damage, and then finally makes its way to the circulatory system, attacks connective tissue. It forms these gumata on bones. Familiar with that term? Gumata are lesions, any kind of lesion, that's typically found on the connective tissue, on the periosteum of bones, especially long bones. And archaeologists who digging up mummies here, there, and everywhere oftentimes find these evidence of these lesions, which means that tuberculosis has been around for a long, long time. It's not a new disease at all. What's the problem with tuberculosis worldwide today? We have a new name for it. This is the one that I see in my literature more common than anything else. XRTB. Any clue? It means extra resistant tuberculosis. So we just don't have multiple resistance here, we have extreme resistance to antimicrobials. And in many cases, people are coming down with TB that we can't treat at all. They just don't respond to anything. Yeah.
Wasn't there a case of TB where somebody had to they were trying to have them locked up in some kind of, situation because they didn't want them traveling? They had extra resistance?
Oh, yeah, it's the same scenario. You get somebody on an airplane who's hacking away and you expose people around you in the plane.
Right.
And there was that scenario a couple of years ago where a guy flew in from Germany or something like that, and they were going to monitor him for a while to make sure that nobody else got it, because it's like carrying a weapon on a plane at that point. It's a deal with what do you do with them? Yeah.
So when it comes to like testing positive for this, how do you know that it's more than just, oh, I tested positive for TB?
You take the, you go for the X-ray.
I mean, I know, I know,
It's-
chest x-rays.
Yeah, and you
but
do
then-
the chest x-ray next. If they find something negative there, they may just say, we're gonna monitor you over the next year or two. But in a hospital situation, you can understand why they take that much more seriously. Because we don't want you giving tuberculosis to your patients. So I'm not sure what the protocol is here right now, but it used to be, if you tested positive, were gonna give you a chest x-ray, they were gonna wait a couple of months, they were gonna check you again to see if you still tested positive. And if you did, and it seemed to be a strong reaction, they were gonna put you on the meds. Is that,
My father-in-law actually had non-active TB. He got it while working at a call center.
yeah,
And basically, as soon as they tested positive for it, they did the chest x-ray. If that came back showing anything, they immediately started the medication regimen on them.
yeah, and I'm not sure if different places have different protocols for that.
Yeah.
What do you got, John?
I'm a PPE converter. I think here it's like every 2 years I just have to have an active.
Yeah.
Chest x-ray, otherwise I just fill out a questionnaire
Yeah.
about symptoms.
Yeah, see, me too.
And without the evidence of a chest x-ray, the chances of you being a transmitter of the disease is next to nil. It's pretty slim. How did we used to treat TB patients prior to antibiotics?
Just took them in a long way to burn it down.
Well, in some cases, yeah.
Used to isolate them in some kind of sanitarium.
Yeah, they used sanitariums a lot.
Yeah.
In Kentucky, Mammoth Cave, I don't know if you've ever been down to Mammoth Cave and you've gone through that, you remember they used it as a TB sanitarium for a significant period of time. Why? Consistent cold temperatures, and they knew that people lived longer if they lived in those temperatures, because obviously what does it do to the organism? You inhale that cool air all the time. Remember your optimum cardinal temp? And now you're living in this and you drop down here, what does it do to the reproduction rate of the organism? Drops it significantly. The sanitariums are pretty much all gone with, on the west side, what was the big TB sanitarium here? Yeah, we got West Siders. Was Dunham, which now Dunham Recreation Center. Used to be a tuberculosis sanitarium. And it's always interests me now to hear them talk about it as a rec center. But it just sounds funny to me. But the number of cases has risen significantly, not just in the United States, again, typically following along the increase in number of patients who have HIV or individuals with HIV. But worldwide, it is still a major problem. It's one of the top 5 killers in the world today, along with malaria and HIV and sleeping sickness and so on and so on. So it's one to be dealt with, but now becoming extremely difficult to treat, extremely difficult. Sometimes you see this also as ER-TB, but most of the literature I see, it's just XR-TB. Yep.
So, as you say, that's like the top 5 killers. So do people with HIV not die of HIV, then they die from...
Exactly. So they're going to die from some other disease. So they'll die from tuberculosis or, in some cases, multiple lung infections. Klebsiella, usually, and then strep and staphylococcus. They usually have 4 or 5 different bugs causing massive damage to respiratory tract.
So when you do die from tuberculosis, what happens? They just shut down your lungs?
Yeah, you have so much lung damage that finally, the respiratory exchange is diminished significantly. That's usually what kills them. But also, there's blood loss. Usually the person becomes malnourished, don't want to eat, and so on. So it's system failure, really, more than just that. Leprosy, just real quick. Cases of leprosy in the United States anymore, yes or no? Yes, exactly right. Where are most of those cases? In the South. So we find them East Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Louisiana, or however they say that, and the Panhandle of Florida. Most cases of leprosy. Interestingly enough, it follows what particular organism? Yes, armadillos. We know that armadillos harbor this organism. It has never been proven that, in turn, armadillos are the ones who shed leprosy to humans, but we do know that they harbor the organism, so they're a reservoir. But how much contact do people have with armadillos? Usually run over them, right? Or when I was a kid, you went to Florida, you could buy them stuffed. I never knew what happened. I guess my mother threw mine out at some point in time. But I had this stuffed armadillo that I kept in my room. I used to buy stuffed alligators, stuffed armadillos, all kinds of crap when I went to Florida. Yes.
My mom lives in Texas, like Roanoke, Texas, and she said that every festival or carnival or social event that she's been to, they've had here pet an armadillo.
Okay, I wouldn't pet any pet in a pet zoo. You know, if you, I mean, you're going to come down with a whole variety of things, whether that's hemorrhagic E. coli, that would be my most concern. But the thing about leprosy is that it grows so slowly. It reproduces so very slowly that usually your exposure has to be continuous over a period of time. So you kind of have to have a pet armadillo that you were going to pet every day, as opposed to one-time exposure.
I was just about to ask that, 'cause let's say at the zoo down here, they, you know, the kids section, you can pet this, an armadillo, and
Yeah.
Zoos probably keep better track of that than a petting, because like petting zoos that travel and stuff like that, that's probably a little.
Yeah, it's
less-
probably a different scenario there.
Yeah. Like-
And not to say you don't want to scratch a heifer behind the ear. Because you get a big jersey with those big brown eyes, and you look at it, and you can't help but give them a scratch behind the ear. Leper colonies, though. You know, what was the scoop with leper colonies? Yeah, first of all, the organism, it doesn't go for the lungs. It goes, well, actually, there are two types of leprosy. There's a pulmonic leprosy and there's cutaneous. The one we're most familiar with is the cutaneous one, because what happens with time, your fingers fall off and then your toes go, and so on and so on. And so they used to have leper colonies. Where was the biggest leper colony associated with the United States? It was in Hawaii. Exactly right. And there, in one of the islands, they had this leper colony. But the amazing thing was, there was a nova about this a bunch of years ago, is that there were these leper ships that they'd put the lepers on there and they'd sail them over to, and the pilot got paid per head. So the more that he sailed over there and dumped off, the more money he got. Well, he figured that's a pretty long trip, and if the winds aren't right, you know, it's going to take me a long time to come back and get another load. So what we'll do is take a whole bunch of rocks along with us and tie these rocks with a rope around these guys' necks. And so I leave the port and I go around the island. We just dump them over the side. And so they were dumping lepers off right and left, drowned them there, and the guy came back and pick up more and so on. So it was kind of an interesting deal. An entrepreneur.
People just didn't know he was doing that?
I wonder how he got back so fast.
Did most of them
Yeah.
come from like Rome and Greece and stuff? Like lepers?
Well, leprosy goes back into scriptural stuff. You find in the Hebrew Testament, my gosh, there's loads of, in the Hebrew Bible, loads of references to lepers. And if you were a leper, you were considered unclean, right? And this was, you got that disease because you had really done something. You'd sinned big time. And this was God's way of dealing with you.
I remember seeing something on like the History Channel, they put them all in a hole.
Yeah, I mean, they used to do terrible things to them.
Throw 'em all
Yeah. Or they'd find a cave and they'd put them all in there. And,
I wonder if that's just because it looks so bad.
well, sure.
You know what I mean? Whereas
Somebody's
a lot
come begging you for food who has no fingers anymore.
Like a lot of other diseases, like you cannot, like look, you know, other than they look like they don't feel good. You know what I mean? Like you can't see it.
Yeah, this is pretty debilitating.
Yeah.
Pretty debilitating.
The picture on 561.
561, yep. And what's that photograph of?
Hand,
Hand.
palm.
Yeah, exactly right. That's Lepratimus leprosy. The other type is what we refer to as tuberculoid leprosy, which is usually just the skin turns funny colors and kind of falls off in sheets, but it's this Lopratimus one which actually causes the digits to fall off. So anyway, the point of the whole thing is that it's still around and responds well to antibiotics if it's diagnosed in time. So meantime, steer clear of the armadillos. Last one. Let's just do one more on this page and be done. Non-acid fast. You down there? Actually, we probably should do two. It talks about non-acid fast, regular and pleomorphic. Regular simply means they look like a typical rod. You okay? And do you recognize a genus under there? Named after Lister. Listeria. Listeria monocytogenes. Where do we see listeriosis show up? Almost always. It'll show up in the paper once or twice a year, a local paper, because there's an outbreak of listeriosis. Typically associated with unpasteurized dairy products. Or, it's the ballpark Franks thing, under processed hot dogs. And hot dogs are interesting kind of a, can't call them meat. They're, I don't know how you describe that. They've got just all kinds of stuff in it. But what I used to do with the class a couple of years ago, and probably should start doing that again, is if you bring in a package of hot dogs, you know there's always some liquid in the bottom of the package where you open it up. You plate that out and it's just loaded with bacteria. Loaded with bacteria. So it's kind of like, you know, your parents wait to grill out there and wait for the charcoal to get hot, and the kid's going, I want a hot dog, and go, just eat a raw one here. And then you wonder why the kid, you know, is barfing in the middle of the night and so on and so on. You know, you poison the kid.
Thanks a lot.
Never eat a raw hot dog. Never, ever eat a raw hot dog. Anyway, but listeriosis, pretty common. Pleomorphic one. The only one we're going to look at there, we can look at both quickly, but Carini bacteria.
What does that mean, pleomorphic?
What does that mean? Pleo?
Rhymes with Pleo.
Morphic, you know what that means. Means, morphos means shape.
Changing shape. Multi-shape.
Exactly, multiple shapes. So pleomorphic means that instead of being these nice little cute little rods, that oftentimes the rods are bent and curved and sometimes even look like they have branches on them. They're just weird looking rods. And Carini bacteria, I mean that's an interesting one. Carini bacterium. Diphtheriae. Obviously the causative agent for diphtheria. And we go back up here, and there it is, right? So now we've hit all three, haven't we? We know pertussis from that gram-negative group. We now dealt with Clostridium gram-positive, and whereas this was asayid, or we said that tetanus was a toxoid, and the same is then with diphtheria. We get a diphtheria-toxoid. How many cases of diphtheria anymore? It's a rarity. It is a rarity because so many people have been vaccinated. There's the titer remains for a long time, and we end up with something referred to as herd immunity. What does that mean? What do you think that means?
If enough people get vaccines, then the rest of the population.
Exactly right. Exactly right. The chances of it being spread are reduced significantly when you have herd immunity, and we're the herd because we've all been vaccinated for this a couple of times. What happens with Carinibacterium diphtheriae? Why did so many children die of it? You know, in the film about Mary Mallon that we saw, it made mention of the fact that one of the major diseases at that time, turn of the century, was also diphtheria. You go down into Spring Grove Cemetery in the children's section down there, and you'll see all those kids who died before about 1950. It was diphtheria that killed them. Loads of them down there. So what is diphtheria?
It says it's a Symptoms include sore throat, localized pain,
Yeah, so-
fever, laryngitis, oozing of fluid composed of intercellular. Ooh, it's nasty.
So it was a nasty bug because it invaded the lining of the throat and produced this pseudo membrane, much like Clostridium difficile does in your colon. And what eventually happened is that the opening, the respiratory opening, was reduced so much, and toxins were sent out all over the place, and kids usually died of multiple system failure, everything from respiratory to cardiac to kidney and all of that stuff. It was a major killer. My two oldest sisters died of diphtheria long before I was born. They were my mom's first two kids, and so one lasted 6 months, the other lasted, I think, a year and 2 months. But they both died of diphtheria. There was no way to treat them. Sometimes because of this goofy pleomorphic kind of a configuration, the term that's used kind of probably not politically correct. They call it the Chinese letter bacterium because it looks like Asian writing. Oftentimes when you look at them underneath the microscope, so it's kind of interesting from that point of view. So we still get vaccinated for it, but it's kind of a historical disease. So interesting enough in that respect.
If somebody did get it, I mean, do we have a treatment for it now?
Yeah, it responds well to antibiotics, but the chances are you're not going to get it if somebody's even yakking all over you and because you've got such a strongly built immunity for it.
Yeah, sure.
The vaccine, the toxoid, elicits a very strong, long-lasting immune response, so it's a good one. Anybody know the one that lies with that, Propionibacterium? Ring a bell for anybody? There are drugs that use part of this genus name. The species name is Acnes. And this produces a type of acne which is very different from the kind we all got when we turned 13. Where you got the zit in the middle of your forehead and that kind of stuff, which is what? Staphylococcal folliculitis, typically. This is a major acne condition where we end up with a bacterium that invades the follicles but causes significant cellular damage. So the person is typically left with a deeply pocked face. So it's a severe form of acne. And yet, if caught in time, it responds well to antibiotics as well. But in some cases, oral and topical and so on, it still doesn't respond well, and some people still get badly pocked out of the whole thing. Okay, we're done with the rods, gram-positive, gram-negative. All we've got to do next is, and we'll take a quick break here, and we can come back and do this, is deal with a couple of curve forms, and we're done. This party is over. So let's take a 10-minute one, real quick. We'll come back and spend another half an hour together and be done. Be done. Yeah, you can turn them in any time.
So, can we turn them in?
Yeah, you can turn them up to the day of the exam.
So we can turn them in right before we take it? Or would you like to turn it in
Well, I start to read them now for the people who have turned them in already, so it's great. Otherwise, I'm left with 2 days to read 42 papers.
Okay. Can I put it in your mailbox?
Please?
Can I put it in your mailbox?
Sure. Or you can put it in the cubby on my door, my office. I'm right next to the micro lab, right next door.
Okay.
So I've got this slot thing on there. You can just slip it in there. Yep, that'll work fine.
I lost mine of those. Can I go make a copy of yours? Or do you
I think I've got an extra. Just take that.
just take this one? Okay.
If I give you my paper, it's finished.
Sure.
Will you look over it?
No, I won't do that. But you can have somebody else look over it.
Okay. Well, they did.
Give it to somebody you trust.
I did already. I'll just turn it in.
Excellent. Yes, dear. No, do not do an abstract.
If
Okay?
I did an abstract.
Forget, if you've done it, fine, no big deal. But I don't require it. I just want a nice title page in the paper. That's all I need.
I
Thank you, dear. Excellent.
Mine's a little diabetic because I couldn't verbally figure out how to explain.
You do whatever works for you.
I'm sitting like, how am I going to explain this in words?
And that's a great idea. It's a great idea.
See, the only portion that I really took from the lab was about the blood on your plate, so I really need to explain the blood on your plate.
Well, you wanted to tell why you use blood iron.
I did.
Then that's all you gotta do.
Right, no
I don't need to explain what it does. I mean, I don't need to explain exactly.
No, you just have to say, I use this media because, and these are my results.
Yeah, it's a differential. It's a differential.
Okay,
There you go.
Do what I did. I wrote what I did and how I did it.
After you take 30 minutes.
That's all that matters.
Hi, how are you? I'm good. I'm class right now.
I would not be surprised. I mean, like, I'm sure he'll, like, it'll be safe when I come back. I would venture to say this all for a long time. I'm, like, seriously thinking about writing my last did you see how long the list was? And, like, my poor little man, halfway through the first one, I was but I'm not like
Hi, Allison.
I wrote in it. I was working on it. Last weekend, students fell out. Like rapid practice. I'm sure
I mean, I like them, we did Kyle did like a lot
of presentations and like
That's what I didn't like about it.
I wondered if it has something to do with like the bacteria that's in there. You know what I mean? Like.
I'm trying to remember. I didn't see one right this down for me. We did. And I thought about it. The last play was blood iron.
I think I said yes.
It means with no right.
No, but mine, I got regular, I have to go. You didn't have to do it. They just
sent out two, but I took them.
Is it the wrong area?
Yeah.
Coagulated. I went through a bunch. I saw it.
Like, I don't
It turned into like this little blue blob.
Why didn't you finish it?
I did. I just don't want to really find out if I
know how they fix them.
really talk about it. And being around my kids, so.
Like today, I was just like, I just walk, but usually I have been doing that. Not like on a consistent basis, but like if the weather was bad or if I was just running around. Well, I haven't
Like, I think I
been
never
actually getting in trouble.
Honestly, like, if I saw Beyonce, I would concert, I would probably cry. Like, if I saw Beyonce in front of me, I'd probably cry. June 28th.
At the Red
Yeah, that's how the Beach Boys did it last year. I don't know.
I know, but still, that's a little bit.
Probably was different than Beyonce and Jay-Z.
It was the Beyonce, or not the Beyonce, it was the Beach Boys with Jessica
I'm looking right now. Actually, we're just coming with Avril Lavigne. The same dance. Yeah, what do you think about that? Sunday.
I'm scared of life. You wanna know why? Because we learned about birds. And so, you wanna know why else? I have two giant metal rods on my back. And holding on to the umbrella.
What to really
There wouldn't be a bird, it'd just be dead. Like,
Yeah, what else? What else?
it's real. I'm like, okay, I don't like lightning anymore. I know it's like a one of a chance, but it's like, I'm parked and I'm like, all the burn pills that don't do good. Metal on my back. But then let's go burn for me to be fried. Bye, everybody.
Like I didn't have to, like, figure out what the culture was, or all that stuff. Like, it might not have every single, but half of my books that I have, and then the whole catalog. I don't really think the second one I only read, it was the first one. Mine was really bad. No, mine was super good. My topic was really, really hard, so I didn't find anything on there. And I only have 2 or 3 minutes.
It begins tomorrow at 8 a.m. But that's an exclusive theme night.
I felt like when I'm working on mine, I felt like I kept like, and in order to like explain the effects of it on education, I had to sort of go to what happened around that time. So, like, a good chunk of it is about education, but it's about half and half. The other half is like history of what happened with like your Maggie on the girls and that. Because it's like, that whole word stuff. She sounds like
What's it called?
instead of like and noisy. Yeah, and it also helped me.
ended up, I just kind of lost out. I had a whole lot, I had a lot.
I get to listen free.
It's a nice other Sunday.
I don't have my sister might like some.
Make sure you're right.
My wife is very
Actually, graduation was because I have the kind of
simple, but she's like.
basically he's saying she likes the other things in life.
I wear long things.
I had to know like at 16. My website's on there. Yeah. You can and they have to play. So if you know anyone, I do. She started out pretty much I got through Step Brothers twice yesterday. I need to stop. I started at 8 in the morning. We are just probably.
I've never seen.
Oh my God. That is my favorite movie of all time. All day on Thursday, I guess in this those were the projectile on up to 3 feet, up to if you think, I mean, I need such the power of There's not much.
Adults have the GERD.
But yeah, I found her. I did. I guess they can use it. I figured it out. Actually, I walked over there. Because he has a library.
Anyway, real quick, you got 2 sheets coming back. The one is actually from my listserv, American Society of Microbiology, and I probably just should have sent this out via email, but I was there real quick and I just made a quick copy. This just came through over the weekend, so I haven't had a chance to read it all. There's been a lot of talk lately in terms of vaccines and everything like that. Everybody got 2 copies? So I ran copies off for you, but it gives you a series of websites that you might want to go to just for more information concerning vaccines. And one is this interview with Samuel Katz, who is well known for being involved in the development of the measles vaccine, and so on and so on. So when you're bored on Friday nights, no date, your wife has kicked you out or your husband, might be something you want to do. So just take a look at that. Okay, the handout that I gave you, the other one, number 2. Now we're jumping to the curved form, just a few of them. So, don't think we're going to be here for the next 2 hours going through this again. So we're just trying to tie up some loose ends here. Notice the orders, and I'm not asking you to memorize those, but there are 2 orders that are found there. And there are actually 3 orders, but I will leave one of these out. One is called the Spirocataceae, and the other is what? The Leptospiraceae, excuse me. Look at the one down below real quickly. Do you recognize any of those diseases? Leptospirosis? Probably not. It's usually an occupational disease associated with people that deal with sewer water. So we're not going to deal with that one. But let's look up above in the Spirocataceae. First of all, the genus Borrelia. And in that genus Borrelia, there is one species, and we'll just pay attention to one. So it's Borrelia, and the species is Bergdorfii, named after Dr. Bergdorf. And disease that 15, 20 years ago was kind of unheard of in the Hamilton County area, but now shows up more commonly, and the disease is Lyme disease. Now, what do you know about this?
Ticks.
There's somehow a vector involved, and the vector in this case is a very specific kind of tick. I'm not going to ask you, Demeter, I'm not going to ask you to memorize genus of the tick and all of that. Yes, dear?
Did that say Bergdorfil?
Bergdorfii. I left an E out.
It's on the paper.
It's on the,
Yeah.
yeah.
So anyway, and you know my spelling. But what else do you know about Lyme disease? Where does the name come from? The first documented case of Lyme disease was in mid-70s, something like that, late 70s, 1970s, in Lyme, Connecticut. And so the disease got its name because of the city where it happened to be first seen. And the scenario there was a young boy, your text goes into that, and complained of aching joints, and slowly went into an arthritic kind of a condition and lost the ability to walk and all of that. And they tried to trace it back and find out what was going on. They thought it was just a severe childhood arthritis. The kid was 9, 10 years old, something like that. They kept looking, and none of the blood work was negative and negative and negative and all that, but they weren't looking for bacteria. Finally, they discovered that there was this spirochete. Remember what a spirochete looks like? Tightly coiled with axial filament, this unique kind of flagellation that allows it to corkscrew. So they found the organism present there, and they just kept going back and back, and this is just prime epidemiology, like you saw with Typhoid Mary. They took it back, and the mother remembered that he had been bitten by a tick in the back of the neck, and that it was unusual because it developed this wheal, this rounded reddish area that was very pronounced for a period of time. And so they finally went back and said, boy, we got an organism we've never seen before. And Bergdorf was part of that whole thing, and they named the particular bug after him. The vector is a tick. What's the reservoir? Yeah, it's these damn deer. And white-footed field mice also, it can be found there too. So why did this disease, which started out localized along the coast in New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, why did that all of a sudden spread? And it's these stinking deer. And we ought to shoot them all. They made their way from the East Coast and went west. We pretty much cleared them out of here by the 1970s. You know, hunting, deer hunting in Ohio was, you had to hunt hard to find a white-tailed deer. But now they're everywhere. They're in my backyard right now as we're talking, eating my hostas off.
Yeah, really.
And you walk up to them and they snort at you, and so they shouldn't be here. So they're the reservoir. The tick goes for a blood meal, same old scenario. The female tick that goes because she needs blood meal for her eggs, and sucks and then drops off again. And what does she do to be picked up again? Ticks are unique.
They probably think we shouldn't be here.
Yeah, that's probably it. So you got a nice tall grass here, and the tick has got these front legs which hold onto the grass, and it's kind of like this all the time. And just wait for somebody to come by and they grab and they let go, and they take the ride with the next one coming through. But a problem. Treatable?
Yes.
Yes. Not treated, death could ensue. But usually with this rash that kind of breaks up, and it looks very much like syphilis, quite honestly. Yeah.
Can other animals get Lyme disease? Like dogs?
Best of my knowledge, no. Don't quote me on that. Is that Kim?
Yeah, I think my dog's gotten vaccinated for it.
Well, I wonder if it's for the tick.
Yeah.
I don't know. Don't quote me on that one. I could lie, which I do often.
Don't trust him.
But I think they're vaccinated for the tick, so that they can't be a carrier of the tick.
Maybe, yes, but the ticks don't attach, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Antibiotics?
Yes. It responds well to different kinds of antibiotics, Cipro, a bunch of others. So if it's diagnosed in time, it really is it's very treatable. I had a high school friend of mine who lived in Finneytown, still lives in Finneytown, who was clearing off stuff in his backyard, wild honeysuckle and all this stuff, and just got sick, lost a lot of weight, had this rash that would come and go, had to be rolled around in a wheelchair, and he kept going back to his GP, and they didn't know what it was. They thought it was severe arthritic attack or something like that. Finally went down to UC, this is just not a couple of years ago, and the infectious agent down there said, we just got to do a blood sample on you. They found the spirochete, and he darn near had died before because his GP didn't know how to react to the symptoms. But they saved him. He was near, as he said, he was near death. He thought he was going to die the next day.
Yeah, dogs can get Lyme disease.
They can get Lyme disease. There you go. So the answer is correct. Well, it's good having those things in class. Although I've never heard of a dog that had Lyme disease. Anybody
But
have
it
it?
doesn't make the news.
Probably not. What would be more likely to make the news in Cincinnati?
Person dying of Lyme disease.
No freaking cat getting rescued by a deer out of a pond.
Something like that.
You had every news station.
So yeah, moving on. Let's just look at one other one here, and that's down at the bottom, treponema. And with treponema, this is always an argument again in terms of how many species there are. Pallidum is is a pretty universally accepted species, although when you get into these meetings that I go to and somebody talks about syphilis, they really say that it is a subspecies of Treponema pallidum that causes human syphilis, so they call it Treponema pallidum pallidum. And that's where it almost becomes laughable. You sit in those meetings and people argue about that stuff. But as I mentioned with Burgdorferi, what happens with this? It goes through a series of stages. So you get the bite, you get the localized infection, then it kind of goes away, and then you end up with a rash, and then that goes away, and then you come up with this debilitating arthritic condition. So it goes primary, secondary, tertiary. Well, we have the same thing with Treponema pallidum, and this is syphilis. So, which is a major problem, right? Of the big three, venereal diseases out there, the big three, they're what? Number one and number two, although they're often neck and neck, as it were, is gonorrhea and chlamydia. And then typically syphilis comes in behind. Reportable disease?
Yes.
Yes, exactly. How many cases in Hamilton County every year? Thousands. Okay, so there are a bunch of them. So it is a problem that has been around forever and will not go away. And the problem with syphilis now is that it's becoming resistant to certain types of antibiotics, again, that used to work well on it, just as we saw with gonorrhea. Same scenario. So what happens with syphilis? Anybody got it right now?
Oh, come on now.
Nobody ever raised their hand. Never. Not necessarily penicillin, but
That's what was used to treat it.
but they went with a whole variety of different drugs for a while, and they just try to keep one step ahead of treating the bug, because we keep seeing resistance show up. But treatable is the important thing. So you get it. How do you get it? Well, obviously you're intimate with somebody. You don't get it from a toilet seat or a doorknob, although you could get it from a doorknob, but I don't want to have that thought go through my head right now. So you're with somebody who's shedding the spirochetes. So either the woman is shedding the spirochetes from her vaginal lining, or the male is shedding them from his urethral lining, or from the skin on his penis. Okay? So you pick up the bug, and what does it do? Well, for the first couple of days, you've got to be a portal of entry, so there's a crack in the glans penis or a crack in the vaginal wall, and the little spirochetes get in there, and they're happy, and they reproduce, and they're swimming all over the place, and they just love being there. And you have what's referred to then as a chancre, as opposed to a canker. Okay? The organisms are just reproducing, and they're hanging out right there. And then they kind of go into this doldrum, and you think, whatever that was went away. I changed detergents. Maybe that's what it was, that gave me the itchies. And so, but what's happened is, while they seem to be dormant from that side, they have gone out to see the world. So now they are making their way through your body. They become systemic, and weeks to months later, depends upon the initial dose that you had, they show up on the skin, various places, sometimes all over, sometimes just on the face and the chest, but you end up with these small little chancres that show up that still ooze. And those may stick around for a week or 2 or 3 weeks, something like that. It depends upon your immune system, your overall health and all of that, but then they go away again. So that's really stage 2. So what happens then in the third phase, in tertiary syphilis, is what are they doing?
It's like neurotic.
Okay, so now they go for deep tissue. And so they go for heart valves, they go for the liver, and they will eventually then just burrow their way right through the blood-brain barrier and get into central nervous system. And when they get into central nervous system, extremely difficult to treat. And what happens from there? So you've already got heart valve problems. You're in major coronary situation. Your liver is no longer doing its thing. Much like you saw with tuberculosis, it affects connective tissue, especially periosteum, so gumata on bones show up again. But then there comes the dementia with third stage syphilis. And there's all kinds of people who said who have had syphilis, and some are documented, some are not. There's always the story that Hitler had it and Mussolini had it and so on and so on. And I'm not sure that we have accurate records to prove that. We usually say that anybody who shows some kind of demented behavior is tertiary syphilitic. But there are a lot of people I know like that I don't think are syphilitic. But it becomes very difficult to treat at that point.
In the third stage?
In the third stage, yeah. But you're no longer infectious, that's the good thing. Because the organism stays deep, it doesn't pustulate on the skin anymore. So yeah, primary and secondary, you're very infectious. As long as you've got these little chancres starting to open up and ooze, you can spread the disease big time.
Is it more infectious in men than it is women?
I thought men can be carriers.
It's the same scenario in that men oftentimes have urethral damage and lesions. And if it's up the urethra in the prostatic or membranous urethra, he doesn't know except that he may have some pain in urination and may notice that there's an exudate, kind of like gonorrhea. But usually there's not this oozy, pussy gonorrhea kind of stuff going on. So male can be asymptomatic to an extent.
Gotcha.
Because they pee everything out, right?
Yeah, they keep urinating. We use the word urine. They or micturate. And so they kind of keep the numbers down. But it doesn't mean that they're less infectious.
Well, we watched a thing about the Tuskegee
exactly.
study in ethics
Yep.
last week. And, they were only doing studies. I know it was like the beginning of syphilis, and they're still trying to figure it out. But they had only, at that point, were doing these studies on men.
Mm-hmm.
So I just didn't know if there was a reason.
And I'm not sure why with that Tuskegee study they chose those men. I don't remember the history behind all of that. But well, let me share something with you that may help. Hold on, let me look it up real quick.
Why they chose those men or why they didn't choose?
Why those guys were chosen, 726.
Because they were born.
There was some sort of, I think it had to do with the hospital. And they went just with what was, these people were near that hospital, and that hospital had the type of things that they needed.
This is not uncommon though, where they would inoculate people with a bacterium after the golden age of microbiology. When they knew that this organism caused this disease, and they wanted to follow the progression, they would inoculate convicts, volunteers, children in many cases, because children are, they come and go. So here, listen to this, a brief history of syphilis, and then it ends with a limerick. And usually when you think of limerick, at least every limerick I ever learned was not repeatable in public. But anyway, this one is kind of different. Anyway, syphilis was first recognized in Europe near the end of the 15th century. That's what years? 1400s. 1400s, right? During this time, the disease reached epidemic proportions in the Mediterranean areas. According to one hypothesis, and I think it's more than a hypothesis right now, syphilis is actually of New World origin. Because what happened in 1492? Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right?
Yes.
And brought back syphilitic sailors. And we could sing a song about syphilitic sailors too.
Or did he just take them with him?
They got it when they were there because they'd been at sea for a long time and they were lonely. And there were women awaiting them on the shore. Do I have to explain? Anyway, according to one theory, is that Christopher Columbus and his crew acquired it in the West Indies and introduced it back into Spain during their return from their first historic voyage. Another hypothesis is that syphilis had been endemic for centuries in northern Africa and may have been transported to Europe at the same time because there was a lot of sailing going on and trading and all that kind of stuff. Syphilis was initially and variously called the Italian disease because nobody wanted to say, it's like the American disease. So they called it the Italian disease. They were offended, and then it got called the French disease. And then it was called the Great Pox to distinguish it from smallpox. In 1530, the Italian physician and poet, and Fracastoro, we should probably have mentioned him in the history way back at the beginning, because he did a lot of interesting work speculating that there were these small things you couldn't see that spread disease. Anyway, he wrote a poem which was called Syphilis Sive Morbus Gallicus, which means syphilis or the French disease. And again, he was Italian, but he's trying to dump the disease off onto the French. And in this poem, a Spanish shepherd whose name was Syphilis. Now, we don't have a whole lot of people naming their kids Syphilis anymore. You think about that. Anyway, he's being punished for being disrespectful to the gods by being cursed with the disease. So again, it's a scenario what? You kind of did something to the gods and they don't like you and they give you disease. Several years later, though, Fracastoro published a series of papers in which he described the possible mode of transmission of the seeds of syphilis through sexual contact. And what he was doing was simply watching the boats come in, the women who worked the wharf, he knew who they were, and he simply followed who spent the night with, or an hour, with that woman, and so on and so on. And he followed, and he said, he localized it, he said, it's these women working on the wharf now who are spreading this disease, or these seeds, whatever he called them. He didn't know how to explain it because, where are we at that point? We haven't seen a bacterium yet, and so on and so on. At least associated them with disease. Its venereal transmission was not definitely shown until the 18th century. The term venereal is derived from the name Venus, the Roman goddess of love. Recognition of the various stages of syphilis was demonstrated in 1838. This is still before the golden age of microbiology, by Philip Ricord, and here you go, who reported his observations on more than 2,500 human inoculations.
Wow.
So we talk about the Tuskegee. How many guys were there? 15 or something like that? I don't remember. But here we're talking 2,500. So he inoculated them with pus and just kind of watched what happened to them. In 1905, so 110 years ago, Schauden and Hoffman discovered the causative agent, the spirochete. In 1906, von Wassermann introduced the diagnostic test that still bears his name. So if you're going, somebody says, I'm going to my doctor to have a Wassermann test, you know. Okay. In 2009, Paul Ehrlich, we know Paul, introduced an arsenic derivative. What was it? Salvarsan, remember that? Oh, as a therapy. But during the same period of time, there was a limerick that was written about the disease. Here it is. Okay, ready? You have to listen closely. There was a young man from Black Bay who thought syphilis just went away. He believed that that his chancre was only a canker that healed in a week and a day. But now he has acne vulgaris. Acne vulgaris? So he's got lots of pustules all over himself, or whatever they call it in Paris. On his head, it has spread from on his skin, it spread from his feet to his head, and his friends just want to know where his hair is, because oftentimes you lose your hair. But there's more to his terrible plight. His pupils won't close in the light. His heart is cavorting, his wife is aborting, and he squints through his gun-barreled sight. Because they enter the aqueous and vitreous humor of the eye as well, and oftentimes causes what's referred to as cloudy eye, or something called moon eye, and a variety of other things. Anyway, arthralgia cuts into his slumber. His aorta is in need of a plumber, and now he has tabes, he has saber-shinned babies, while of gumadas he has quite a number. He's been treated in every known way, but his spirochetes grow day by day. He's developed paresis, has long talks with Jesus, and he thinks he's the Queen of the May. It is, it's so terrible, it's great. It's absolutely great. Anyway, what you got was all three stages of the disease, right?
Do they have one of those in every chapter?
No, but this guy comes up with funny stuff.
Just say you should let the nursing instructors know that.
Yeah. That was a good one.
Okay, last two bugs. The oddballs. Just the oddballs. Because we haven't talked about chlamydia, have we? No? No. And it doesn't kind of fit into any of these categories. It's a cockle form, it's a rounded form. So we got to deal with that one. Trachomatis is actually the species name. And there is only one species. And then what about this one, if I can spell it?
Is chlamydia a spider?
Nope.
And you said it's a cockle?
It's actually a cocciform. You look at it under the scope and it's got a cocciform. And you look at Rickettsia rickettsii, and it's kind of a rod-shaped form, although it's oftentimes more pleomorphic than anything else. Well, the question is, why have we left these two to the end? Well, we know what chlamydia is. We know it's a venereal disease, oftentimes found with individuals also got gonorrhea. They usually have it. Rickettsia rickettsii, named after Dr. Ricketts, associated with what disease?
Rickets?
No. I'm going to put that on the exam. True or false? Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And then you go, why are we talking about Rocky Mountain spotted fever when we live in Ohio? But what we're going to see is that it got its name because it was first discovered to cause infection there. But where are most of the cases of Rocky Mountain spotted fever? North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Kentucky, West Virginia, and Ohio. What's unique about both of these? Well, how do you get chlamydia? From someone who's willing to share, right? How do you get rickettsias? Tick again, vector again. And in that particular case with rickettsia, the reservoir and the vector are the same. So it's the tick that's involved in that particular case. Although humans are reservoirs too. But what's unique about both of these organisms? Why do we wait to the very end to talk about them? They're sometimes called we don't know how to classify them, bacteria. Because they are both obligate intracellular parasites. And then you go, wait a minute. We use that terminology already. Obligate intracellular parasites.
Virus.
Yes, exactly.
Intracellular.
Obligate means they're obligated. Intracellular, inside the cell is where they're going to be. And they're parasites. Well, parasites shouldn't surprise us if they cause disease. Anything that causes disease we usually refer to as being some kind of parasite out of all of this. But why are they obligate intracellular parasites? Well, if you look at these bugs and study them for a period of time, one of the things you notice is that they lack most of the cellular material, or because we don't have organelles here in this case, the cellular enzymes and genes to produce their own ATP and to get done the metabolic activities they need to do. So we've got bacteria now which have lost that capability and are going to rely solely on what? A host cell to do the work for them. So where would we find these? Would you find these circulating in the bloodstream? No. You find them intracellularly, which is why it took, in many cases, so long for us to find out what these diseases they were associated with, because it kept doing blood samples and all that kind of stuff, and they wouldn't show up. Well, with chlamydia, what's the disease? What are the symptoms?
You have stuff coming out of your penis
Okay, or your
or your
vagina. So there's an exudate, which looks different and smells different than gonorrheal exudate. So basically, what do you get with chlamydia? You may be a little uncomfortable, but for the most part,
It's not going to kill you.
it doesn't kill you. It's just kind of a source of irritation, as it were.
If you have gonorrhea or chlamydia, don't they usually treat you for both?
Exactly. If you're diagnosed with one or the other, they'll usually treat you as if you have both of them. Because whatever it is, the percentage is incredibly high. And I don't remember what it is. It's in the 80s. If you've got gonorrhea, you've also got chlamydia. It's way high.
Oh, really?
Why is that? That's so weird.
They just kind of hang out together in there.
Is it because the symptoms are kind of similar?
Yeah, and you know, the person who's you're being intimate with has usually been fooling around, not just with you, and has picked them up from a variety of sources. Did you have a hand up in the back?
Is that the rickettsia or rickettsia?
Rickettsia rickettsii.
So 2 eyes at the end?
Yeah.
It's
Two
on
eyes
page
in the end.
601.
What's the scoop with Rocky Mountain spotted fever? You have spots, exactly right. But it's another one of those organisms that that's an obligate intracellular parasite, and you develop spots. Do people die from Rocky Mountain spotted fever?
No.
Yeah, they can. It can become fatal if left untreated. And again, it's usually with the others when it reaches deep tissue, causes heart damage and all kinds of stuff like that. So it's a disease to be reckoned with. They both are because they're both local. So keep in mind, if you're ever tramping around in the woods, always check the back of your legs and the back of your neck for ticks. And it's a different tick associated with this, rickettsia, and Burgdorferi or Lyme, and what's the other tick disease? Do we just deal with those two?
Mm-hmm.
There are a bunch of others that involve ticks. Dog tick, you know the big dog ticks? Your dog gets them and they swell up with blood and they get pretty, about the size of your nail on your little finger.
Yeah.
Usually those are not associated with being vectors of disease, but more and more we're seeing them show up with Lyme disease, which is kind of odd, but also with rickettsia as well. Yeah.
How do you remove a tick effectively? I've heard different rumors.
There are different stories, and depending upon who you go to, it's going to be one or the other. What you try to do is to get most of the tick out as best you can. So the method that I've always heard is that use a fine needle point forceps, push your way down. I mean, why is the tick there? Okay, and it's the female, right?
Right.
Because she's got eggs. So what the tick will do is burrow, eat away and burrow down in here. So now we've got the head of the tick down in here, legs folded back on itself, and it swells with the blood meal out of all of that. And you're supposed to use a pointed forceps as best you can to reach down and try to get the head and then bend it over backwards and pull it out. They don't burrow that deeply. I mean, we all had ticks, right? Ticks all the time when I was a kid.
I just took them off.
It's really not that hard to get
Yeah,
off.
I got it off my dog.
If they haven't burrowed yet.
Yeah, it's the burrowing that, one thing not to do is to burn them off.
So my mom always used to do.
Because you end up damaging more skin.
Oh, she never burnt me.
Burn them after you
Did
pull
she
them off.
heat a needle?
No, she lit a match and would blow it out and stick it and release. And
Hairdryer works too.
If it works for you, fine.
I used to do that.
Hold on, a little louder.
I just did an in-service training with the director of UC's toxicology.
Yep.
And he said if you burn them, you can also aerosolize the toxins that are in them.
Yeah, I've heard the same story, that burning is really almost a dangerous thing to do. So it's the forceps method, trying to grab as much of the tick as you can, and then treating with topical antibiotics.
the head of it out. Is that
Yes.
true?
Yes, exactly. And that's why with the forceps, you want to get down as far as you can. You push the skin down to grab the head region, tilt over backwards as opposed to pulling straight out, and because you don't want to leave the head in there. So anyway, but do not do the burn them off, the blowtorch method, whatever that is. Okay, this party is over. Couple of things real quick. We're standing up. If you've got any plates in your drawer in the lab, we got to get them out of there. So I'll put a pan, do not dump them in the disposable, the medical waste bag, please. I had to take a whole bunch of them out of there. Everything's got to be autoclaved. So I'll put out a metal tray, you can put them in there and I'll autoclave those things, but make sure that those are done. If you still need to read plates, and I think some of you still have to do that, come and go and do that. I'll be around for lab time if you need me today and tomorrow, but do that. Exam next week, same time, same station, or you want to start at 9?
9 is great.
It's your last exam. You want to start at 9 as opposed to 8:30?
Yeah.
Because you got plenty of time to take it. It won't take you that long. So we'll start at 9 next week. Wait. Hold on. Do not tell the people that aren't here. Okay? We'll let them sit here for half an hour starting to sweat because they think that maybe the exam already happened. So do not tell them.
I haven't looked through here.
Hold on.
Through the book yet, but which chapters were the stuff we went over in?
We're all over the place. You'll have to just kind of use the index again. Again, study method, just repeat it real quickly again. Folders for each of the groups. Using the dichotomous key as your guideline. Study small sections at a time. 15, 20 minutes at a shot, and then walk away. Go back, reference back to the book if you need more information, something was not clear, but have all the handouts that I gave you in place and use those. The lecture will come, or I should say the exam will come from the lecture. Okay? So I'm not going to go dig stuff out of the text that we didn't talk about and make you know that. Okie dokie. And again, if you would do those course evaluations, that would be a huge help. What I'm most concerned about.